This is Gene Jensen with BassResource.com. I'm going to try to do a little video about the spawn and kind of get an overview give you an overview of what the entire spawn is all about. Let's start with a water temperature of 53 degrees. I don't know what it is about 53 degrees. I call it the magic number. It seems like around 53 degrees is when the bass start to get out of their winter funk. They've been lethargic all winter. They haven't eaten much. It's when the bass start to move up and feed for the spawn. Okay, so we call that the pre-spawn, about 53 to, let's say 53 to 58 to 53 to 60 degrees, just to keep it simple. So what happens is they're in their deep winter holes. They're hanging out, and it gets to be 53 degrees, and they start to move up, and what they'll do is they'll work their way along the creek channel. And the places I look for when the water temperature is between 50 and 55 is I look for a creek channel that is running up against I may draw this a little bit later on, but anyway, a creek channel that runs up against the bank, or up against a main point that leads back into a spawning flat. Okay, when I'm fishing, when I'm looking for a spawning flat, the first place I'd look for spawning to happen is the northwestern facing pockets, or pockets on the northwest side of the lake, and I go all the way up to the headwaters of the lake because it tends to be more shallow up there. That water tends to warm up faster, and then as the spawn progresses up there, I'll move further down because I really like to fish the pre-spawn. I don't so much like to fish bed fish. I do it, but I don't prefer it. I like to catch those big fat females that are staging to spawn. Okay, so I locate my spawning flats. I back out of the spawning flats. On a map I'll look out and I say, okay, here's a point that leads back into that spawning flat. Is there a creek channel that runs up against it? Because the creek channel is the highway for the fish. Is there a creek channel that runs up against it? So I find one that does that, and when the water temperature is between 50 and 55 degrees, and actually all the way up into 60, that's where I'll start. I'll work those channels or those points with a jig, with a Carolina rig, but I don't like to, a crankbait or whatever, and then I'll work my way back into the spawning flat. Okay, so say it gets to be about 60 degrees, and the males are moving up into the spawning flat to bed, and you go into the spawning flat and you're going around, and all you see is one fish spanning the bed to get it cleaned up. Back out to 8 to 15 feet, okay, and take your crankbait or a spinnerbait or a rattle trap or something, and parallel the bank between 8 and 15 feet deep. That's where your females will be hanging out and cruising. They were doing that yesterday on this lake. Right now, water temperature is 63 degrees. And all I did was I found that spawning flat, and I followed those contour lines, and I got my boat into 10 feet of water, and I fan cast it out in front of the boat. I caught some pretty good fish. And then once the water temperature gets about 63 degrees, like it did the end of the day yesterday, it's actually 62 right now, but it got 63. The females moved up into these shallow flats and up into the spawning flats, and they started actively spawning. It's a little early in the year to do it, but the water temperature's right, and the first little wave moved in. There's not very many of them doing it. So we've covered pre-spawn. We're right in the middle of the spawn. Now, when you're fishing if you want to bed fish, or if you're covering a flat or bedding area that you know fish are at, the best things are reaction baits, topwater, spinner baits, things like that. Cover the whole area thoroughly. Crankbaits. Kevin Van Dam won last year's Bassmasters Classic by targeting bedding fish in muddy water, and the way he did that is he would fan cast a little square bill crankbait until he bumped a stump. Then he'd put his power poles down and cast to that stump dozens and dozens of times until he got bit, because there were bass spawning on every stump in that little area that he was fishing. So it may take hundreds of casts, and you'll find little places that are holding fish. Another way is spinner bait. I love to fish a top water during the spawn because they're in a protective mood, and they'll absolutely annihilate a topwater frog, something like a Spro frog or Bobby's Perfect frog. Okay, so they're done spawning. For a few days after the spawn, the females are in kind of a funk, and they don't really eat much. But after that, they start to feed up. Now, what I'll do in a post-spawn area is I'll target those males that are garden fry. And the way I do that is with a weightless trickworm. I'll go into the shallows and I'll start jerking a weightless trickworm around, and it will, and you'll catch a lot of male bass that way. And sometimes in some lakes, about that time is when the shad spawn starts. So you go in there with the shallows looking for those shad, and hold on, let me get this fish in the boat. And you'll fish a shad spawn with a rattle trap or a crankbait or a spinner bait. Barely hooked. Prespawn, baby. This is a nice fat female. What I was doing was just paralleling the bank with the crankbait. Doing my pliers. I was paralleling the bank with a crankbait. That's all I did. She followed it up, smacked it. There you go, nice big fish. Big female, about 6 pounds. Too much fun. It was the first time I ever fished this little RC2, this Rick Clunn. I guess a Lucky Strike crankbait. Nice little crankbait. But anyway, so we're in the post spawn and I'm throwing a weightless trickworm around the shallows, getting them to bite. Or I'm looking for the shad to spawn if I'm in a lake with a bunch of docks or seawalls and things like that. I'm throwing a rattle trap, and I'm throwing a spinner bait. And the females, that's what they'll go feed on, is they'll go feed on those shad. Some lakes, the lakes that have blueback herring, you'll go out in the main lake points and you'll fish for the post-spawn females and males that have come out to feed on the blueback herring that are spawning on those shallow points. But that's the spawn in a nutshell. Not much to it. You just watch the water temperature, follow the water temperature. Your ideal spawning water temperature is 63 degrees. They start to move up at 53. And I start throwing top water at about 55, 56 degrees up in the flats. And like I always say, visit bassresource.com for the answer to all your questions about bass fishing. And subscribe to my YouTube channel. And have a great day.